My stepchildren tried to have me committed to a nursing home, so I cut them out of my will. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in my quiet suburban neighborhood. I was 73 years old, living alone in the house my late husband and I had called home for over 30 years. My days were filled with tending to my garden, reading mystery novels, and video calling my biological daughter who lived across the country. Little did I know that my stepchildren had been plotting behind my back for months, waiting for the perfect moment to execute their plan. It all began when I started forgetting small things like where I placed my reading glasses or what I had for breakfast. Normal aging, my doctor assured me during my regular checkup. But my stepchildren saw opportunity in these minor lapses. They had been eyeing my property and savings account ever since their father passed away 2 years earlier. The house alone was worth nearly $500,000, and they knew I had a substantial nest egg from years of careful saving and investing. My stepson visited me more frequently than usual, always asking probing questions about my daily routine. He would inquire about my medication schedule, whether I remembered to turn off the stove, and if I ever felt confused or disoriented. At first, I thought he was being caring and concerned about my well-being. How naive I was to believe his sudden interest in my life was genuine affection rather than calculated manipulation. His sister started joining these visits, bringing notebooks and asking me to repeat stories I had told before. She would exchange meaningful glances with her brother whenever I paused to collect my thoughts or couldn't immediately recall a specific detail. They were building a case against me, documenting every moment of normal forgetfulness as evidence of declining mental capacity. The realization of their true intentions hit me like a cold wave when I overheard them whispering in my kitchen. They were discussing nursing homes, talking about how much money they could save if they found me an affordable care facility. My stepson mentioned that once I was declared incompetent, they could take control of my finances and sell the house. His sister worried that I might live too long and drain their inheritance, laughing about how expensive quality care could be. Standing in my own hallway, listening to them plot my future like I was already gone, felt like being buried alive. The next few weeks were a blur of staged incidents designed to make me appear confused and unable to care for myself. They would move items around my house and then act concerned when I couldn't find them. My stepdaughter would call me multiple times a day, asking if I had taken my medications, then claim to her brother that I seemed disoriented during our conversations. They started telling neighbors that they were worried about me, planting seeds of doubt about my mental state in the community. The breaking point came when they arranged for a social worker to visit my home under the pretense of a routine wellness check. They had contacted Adult Protective Services, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. The social worker arrived with a clipboard full of questions, clearly briefed by my stepchildren about my supposed deteriorating condition. I felt cornered in my own living room, defending my right to live independently, while they sat there with false concern painted on their faces. During the interview, they kept interrupting me, correcting minor details of stories I was telling, and pointing out every small inconsistency as proof of my confusion. When I mentioned that I had been gardening that morning, my stepson immediately jumped in to say that I had been pulling up healthy plants instead of weeds. This was a complete fabrication, but the social worker dutifully wrote it down. I realized then that they had been preparing for this moment for months, crafting a narrative of my incompetence. The social worker recommended a full psychological evaluation, which my stepchildren had already arranged with a professional they had carefully selected. They drove me to the appointment, chatting casually about how this was just a formality and how much they loved me. Their performance was Academy Award worthy, complete with worried expressions and gentle touches on my shoulder. Inside, I was screaming at the injustice of it all, but I maintained my composure, knowing that any outburst would only confirm their claims. The evaluation was a nightmare of tests and questions designed to find cognitive impairment. The psychologist seemed to have already made up her mind before I even sat down, asking leading questions about my ability to manage my finances and live alone. When I performed well on the cognitive tests, she focused on my emotional responses, noting that I seemed agitated and defensive. Of course, I was agitated. I was being railroaded by people I had trusted and cared for as my own children. 3 days later, the results came back with recommendations for assisted living placement. The psychologist had noted several areas of concern, including my defensive attitude during testing and reports from family members about dangerous behavior at home. Reading that report felt like watching someone else's life being dissected and misrepresented. Every normal aspect of aging was twisted into evidence of incompetence, every moment of forgetfulness magnified into a sign of dementia. My stepchildren wasted no time in touring nursing facilities, armed with the psychological evaluation and social workers' recommendations. They found a place an hour away from my neighborhood, far enough that visits from friends would be difficult, but close enough for them to maintain the appearance of caring family members. The facility was clean but institutional, with the smell of disinfectant and the sound of medical equipment beeping constantly. Looking at those sterile hallways, I felt my independence slipping away like sand through my fingers. The night before they planned to move me to the facility, I lay awake in my bedroom, surrounded by memories of the life I had built with my husband. Photo albums filled with our travels, books we had read together, and the antique furniture we had collected over the years. Tomorrow, all of this would be sold or stored away, and I would become just another elderly woman in a care facility, forgotten by the world and abandoned by family who saw me as nothing more than a burden. That's when I remembered the hidden safe in my husband's study, behind the bookshelf filled with his law books. He had been paranoid about keeping important documents secure, installing the safe years ago when we first moved into the house. Inside were our wills, insurance policies, and financial records that my stepchildren had never seen. Most importantly, there was a letter my husband had written to me shortly before his death, expressing his concerns about his children's true motives and their treatment of me. Reading his letter by lamplight, I discovered that my husband had suspected his children's greed long before his passing. He had witnessed their jealousy when he included me in family gatherings, their resentment at having to share his attention and resources with a stepmother. The letter detailed specific incidents where they had made cruel comments about me when they thought he wasn't listening, and his growing realization that they saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance rather than a family member deserving of love and respect. Armed with this knowledge and a renewed sense of purpose, I began planning my counterattack. If they wanted to play games with my future, I would show them that this old woman still had plenty of fight left in her. My first call was to my husband's old law firm, speaking to a partner who had handled our estate planning for years. I explained the situation, and he was appalled at my stepchildren's behavior, immediately agreeing to help me protect my interests and autonomy. The next morning, as my stepchildren arrived to take me to the nursing home, I surprised them by having a lawyer present in my living room. The shock on their faces was priceless as they realized their carefully laid plans were about to crumble. The lawyer explained that I was mentally competent to make my own decisions, that the psychological evaluation had been biased and incomplete, and that any attempt to force me into a care facility against my will would result in legal action. But the real surprise came when I announced that I was changing my will, removing them as beneficiaries and leaving everything to my biological daughter and several charities close to my heart. The house they had been counting on selling, the savings account they had been eyeing, and the investments they had been calculating were no longer theirs to inherit. Their faces went from shock to rage as they realized that their scheme had not only failed, but had cost them everything they had been trying to steal. My stepson started yelling about how ungrateful I was, how they had been trying to help me, and how I was making a terrible mistake. His sister cried crocodile tears, claiming they had only wanted what was best for me and that they loved me like a real mother. But their true colors were showing now, and the lawyer was documenting every word for potential future legal proceedings. The mask of concern had slipped completely, revealing the greedy, manipulative people they had always been underneath. The most satisfying moment came when I told them they were no longer welcome in my home, and that I would be changing the locks immediately. After years of playing the role of the grateful stepmother, pretending to appreciate their minimal efforts at family bonding, I was finally free to tell them exactly what I thought of their behavior. The relief of no longer having to pretend was intoxicating, like throwing off a heavy coat that had been weighing me down for years. Within a week, I had new locks installed, a security system activated, and a restraining order filed to prevent them from harassing me further. My real daughter flew in from across the country, and we spent days going through old photo albums and sharing stories about her father and our life together. She was horrified by what her step-siblings had attempted, but proud of how I had handled the situation. Having her support and validation meant everything to me during this difficult time. The nursing home called several times, wondering when I would be arriving for my scheduled admission. I took great pleasure in explaining that there had been a change of plans and that I would be living independently for the foreseeable future. The social worker who had recommended my placement was less pleased when my lawyer contacted her office to dispute her assessment and request a review of the case. Suddenly, everyone was much more careful about their documentation and recommendations. Life after cutting my stepchildren out of my will was surprisingly peaceful. Without their constant visits and fake concern, I could enjoy my retirement on my own terms. I joined a senior center, took up watercolor painting, and even started dating a widower from my neighborhood. The fear of being forced into a nursing home had made me realize how much life I still had left to live, and I was determined not to waste another moment worrying about people who didn't truly care about me. My biological daughter and I grew closer than ever, talking almost daily and planning visits back and forth. She confided that she had never liked my stepchildren, but had tried to get along with them for her father's sake. Learning about their plot to have me committed had confirmed all her worst suspicions about their character. Having her in my corner, truly understanding and supporting me, made all the difference in moving forward with my life. The most unexpected development came 6 months later when my stepchildren tried to contest the will change, claiming I had been mentally incompetent when I made the decision. Their lawyer quickly dropped the case when faced with testimony from multiple witnesses about their attempted manipulation and coercion. The psychological evaluation that had once seemed like such a threat became evidence of their malicious intent when viewed in the proper context. Looking back on that terrifying period when I nearly lost my independence, I realized it had actually been a blessing in disguise. The experience had shown me who truly cared about my well-being and who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. My stepchildren's greed had revealed their true nature, but it had also revealed my own strength and resilience. At 73, I had proven that I was nobody's victim and that I could still fight for what was right. The house that they had been so eager to sell became my sanctuary, filled with new memories and experiences. I redecorated rooms that had remained unchanged for years, planted new flowers in the garden, and even got a small dog for companionship. Every day in my own home felt like a victory against those who had tried to take away my freedom and dignity. I was living proof that age doesn't necessarily mean vulnerability, and that family isn't always about blood relations. My story spread through the neighborhood and senior community, inspiring other elderly people to be vigilant about protecting their rights and independence. I became an unofficial advocate for seniors facing similar situations, sharing my experience and connecting them with resources to fight back against financial abuse and exploitation. Turning my traumatic experience into a way to help others felt like the best possible outcome from such a difficult situation. The final chapter of this story came when my stepchildren made one last attempt to reconcile, claiming they had learned from their mistakes and wanted to rebuild our relationship. But I had learned too much about their true nature to ever trust them again. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and some relationships are too damaged to repair. I wished them well, but made it clear that they would never be welcome in my life again. Now, as I sit in my garden on quiet evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, I feel a peace that I never experienced during the years when I was trying to please everyone and keep the family together. My inheritance will go to people and causes that truly matter to me, and my legacy will be one of standing up for myself rather than being a victim of manipulation and greed. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones that teach us our own worth and strength. The irony wasn't lost on me that by trying to have me declared incompetent, my stepchildren had actually pushed me to prove just how capable and sharp I really was. Their scheme had backfired spectacularly, costing them not just their inheritance, but also any chance of having a relationship with me in my remaining years. In the end, their greed had been their downfall, and my determination to maintain my independence had been my salvation.